Daniel Mercer, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Coupe Ale Works, and we're sitting here in the 23rd Street National Guard Armory building, which was built in 1938. The Guard operated in here until about 2008, and then the building sat vacant for quite a while. And I happened to live nearby, about a 3-minute drive, and on my way to work for about 4 years, I drove by this building and really kept looking at these giant bay windows from the street and started thinking about the vertical space inside. And after driving by it for a month and really thinking about it, in early 2017 decided to make a call to the state to see what they were going to do with the building. And that's when they told us that they were going to set it up for an RFP that following September, a few months later. And so that really got the gears turning about what we could do in the building. And the state was storing furniture in here, so I might have snuck in the building a couple times during the day while they were moving furniture in and out just to get a sneak peek and try to get a visual and a feel for the space. Brewing obviously takes some critical infrastructure, and that's always been key to us ultimately relocating and finding a home close to the city's core. And it just so happened that, again, we have this big, huge atrium that's 22,000 square feet. The entire building is 89,000. And so that moved forward to September, and when the state opened the building to the public for the RFP and the final issuance of the RFP, it allowed us to get in and come in here, start sonaring the walls and the floors and the columns and the beams to try to get some insight into how solidly built the building was and where the rebar was, things like that, and drilling holes in the floor and really getting a feel for what we were going to have to do. And so we spent about 6 months building the response to the RFP in a competitive process, and then ultimately in April of 2018, the state awarded the winning bid to us, and then that started a cascade of other events, and here we are ultimately about 4.5 years after that. And it has been a long journey. This is a very big building. We started just thinking about this building, and then over the past few years started to expand the envelope of what we really wanted to create here as a destination hotel. And that involved adding some additional rooms, adding things like a pool club and a beer garden, and that necessitated additional land that the state really didn't have any use for. So we end up here today with 8.5 acres of land, 6 buildings. We'll be demolishing 4 of them. There are 4 buildings that really weren't ever integral to the Guard's history here at the Armory. They're the Corporation Commission's fuel testing lab, and then some storage buildings to the south. And then in those spaces, we'll be using those gaps for parking, really to support the ancillary properties around. The primaries being obviously the Armory here, and then what we call the Villas building, or the old Veterans Affairs Administration building, where we'll have 12 hotel villas and a speakeasy in the basement and the kitchen and some other support mechanisms for the pool club and the beer garden, which will all be food and beverage accessible. So inside this building, we've got 14 hotel rooms on the west wing on the 2nd and 3rd floors. And on the east wing, we've got a 4,000 square foot restaurant with a 3,700 square foot patio that faces the Capitol, which is a great view. It's mostly in the shade after about 1:30 in the afternoon. So we've got room in the restaurant for seating for about 60 to 70. And then the patio ultimately, in a dense crowd, could support a crowd of about 180. Seating capacity is probably more around the 130 to 140 range. And then I think the showcase for the building, for me at least, has been the development of the tap room and what we were going to do with it. And so obviously in this giant atrium, we'll be using the space for tanks and the brew house, both the pilot brew house and then the production brew house, as well as all of the support systems on the hot side. Canning line, which will be upgrading, and really none of our existing equipment will be coming to this building. And we struggled a little bit with, what do we do with the tap room? Do we just allow beers, have a giant tap tower with 20 or 30 beers in the restaurant, or do we pull it off as a separate experience? And then when working with the architects a couple of years ago, we kind of created this solution that provides really incredible visibility to the operational space, and something really unique, I think, in an historic structure like this. And so at the far north end of this atrium, we have a 4,000 square foot tap room that is really a glass and steel box. And the purpose was to make it look different, make it not look like this interior brick monolith. And that was partially driven by the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office in the pursuit of historic preservation tax credits, which make this deal feasible. But it was really to build something that was just kind of disconnected but integrated, but also provided a lot of visibility into the operational space, but also into the ceiling and the wooden deck and the bowstring trusses. And so we really have this 4,000 square foot glass and steel box, as we call it, that's going to be a really immersive experience for really the heart of this entire development, which is Coop Ale Works and the brewery. So the process is right now about 5 years long in the tooth, and we still have quite a bit of work to do. We've got some programming internally that we're shifting around with the hotel and some consultants out of Portland, and try to best program the space for amenities and the guest experience here effectively. And once that associated architecture and engineering is finished, then we can kind of move on toward rebidding the entire project post-COVID, because we haven't bid the entire project since February of 2020. So once the rebidding is done, then we'll move forward with kind of the financial close, which will be the comprehensive picture of the tax credit investors, the tax credit buyers, us coming in, and then the bank partners, and those things will hopefully start to move forward and wrap up in the first half of 2023. And then that triggers really what we believe right now in our best estimates with our general contractor to be a 22 to 24 month construction timeline. So ideally, maybe early 2025. So I think the most unique thing that we've discovered in the building, we have to preface all of this by saying that the building is really utilitarian. It's really bare throughout. It was a military complex and not a fancy hotel in its prior life. So in the early 2000s, an event happened here, and we learned this through the curator of the 45th Infantry Division Museum, which is just a few miles away. In the early 2000s, 2001 or 2002, a crew was working over on some concrete on the west side of the building and uncovered 3 artillery rounds that they were a little paranoid about. And so they brought in the ordnance disposal teams from Tinker and also the Highway Patrol Bomb Squad to try to figure out what to do with these artillery rounds. And they were underneath a metal plate just sitting in a bed of dirt, and then that metal plate was covered up with more wood and metal plates surrounded by concrete. And so it was a little alarming. They were TPT rounds, and in the artillery sense, those are training, practice, and target rounds that are used essentially as tracers. And so they have tracer cores in them, but they don't actually have a warhead or any explosive inside. And so that was probably the most unique thing that we've discovered about the building through its history. Those elements in our work with the Infantry Museum, as well as some commanders here in charge of the guard, those things are probably going to get demilled, and we're going to be able to use them for a little special purpose here in the building. But we also have a really good relationship with the museum. We've got a really good relationship with the Oklahoma Historical Society, and I think the outpouring of support to really bring in additional history into this building that may not necessarily exist here now, but may have been here or may have been part of the larger 45th apparatus, is a really cool opportunity to honor the heritage of that division, and frankly, or specifically, their deployments in World War II and the Korean War, which were the most voluminous ones. And so outside of that, other history that people remember here, either having raves in the 90s, going to dog training, things like that. So those are really the 3 most common memories for people, is either they were in the Guard, they had a dance party here, or they trained their German Shepherd. And so